Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. Today is the final Sunday of June, and so, as I promised, is part 3 of the Pride Flags as Art set, and this is likely the final one for this year as well. It seems suitable to send off the month like this, and I have been excited for the flags in this piece and this video, just to kind of see what I could come up with for it and what ideas could be worked on. And these ideas have been sitting and waiting for a while now, and so I got to work on them, and most of them were worked on when I had been sick for a week. Now, this week is also going to be a bit different, and somewhat special today. In the previous two, I have done 3 drawings each time, and looked at these 3 identities. This time, I wanted to do 4, just to sort of wrap it all up, and to finish off on a strong note with the variety of flags that I wanted to look at. So up today we have the blue gay flag, we have the gender fluid flag, the Aero Ace flag, and finally the rainbow pride flag. So without further delay, let's just get straight into it, shall we? And first up on the list is the blue gay pride flag. So as I have done with every other video, I will be briefly explaining these identities, just to sort of give a very basic impression of what it means and what it stands for. See, the term gay refers to someone who has attraction for other people of the same sex, though it is more commonly used to refer to men, just in the way that a lesbian refers to a woman like this, and it does have a lot of nuances that I'm not touching on here. So this flag had actually been hard to find the history of, simply since searching up the gay flag will bring up the main rainbow that most people will know of. However, this flag came to be around due to subtle shifts in meaning, and how the rainbow flag came to be associated with the LGBTQ+ community as a whole. And then people wanted a flag to specifically represent gay men. This one originated on Tumblr in 2019, and had been based off the lesbian flag, as this one too has a 5 and 7 stripe version. The green and turquoise in the flag are meant to represent healing and the community, whilst the white is taken from the transgender flag and is intended to represent gender non-conforming, trans, and non-binary people within the gay community. Finally, the blues and indigo then represent diversity, fortitude, and love. And usually I would talk about why I included this flag over others, or I at least would have in other videos. The truth for this is rather simple and short before we move on. With this one, I wanted to explore this palette, and have had this idea since I saw the flag, and it just felt that I should do it here. It was my chance to explore it. I also sort of knew that it would fit in with everything else, and I wanted to explore it. There was no harm in it. So here we are. And with that, I could begin looking at the ideas of the flag for an art sense, and just begin to generate ideas and sketches for things that may work well through this image and the palette. It is hardly a surprise where my first ideas came to sit as well. The blues and greens often gave me ideas long before I even started this set. After all, it does tend to remind me of the ocean and other bodies of water, just with the brighter tones and the blue, and also the gradient of the flag often connecting to the idea of water getting deeper just whenever I see it. I sort of can't separate the 2 ideas whenever I see the flag, though I did try to come up with other ideas too. I mean, I looked at mountain ideas or something in a mist. Yet each time the ideas were with water, and this was just the preferred idea route in a sense, which sort of meant that I had to just let myself explore this a bit further, which then just ultimately led into the underwater theme that I came to look at here. And again, if you have seen the previous videos, you will know this, and I will say it again. I had been looking at this set and wanted to tie them all into natural environments and themes that tend to reflect nature. I have also been trying to make them all into somewhat unique and give them all their own sort of space, which is why, again, I let myself go down the underwater route as I've not covered this area yet. So with the environment decided though, and a sketch I quite liked, I had plotted in a vague sense of the colours that I could use, just as I have come to normally do. And normally, here is where I discussed the challenges that the flag gave me in terms of palette, yet I had actually been quite lucky with this one. It was by far the easiest palette that I have been looking at for today. The blues were distinct enough that they could layer, and the 7-stripe version had a sense of a gradient through it, so I could work with them quite easily without much struggle in the piece, especially to denote different areas like background, foreground and so on. The only choice I had to make with this one was whether I would use the 7 or 5-stripe version. Yet whenever I looked up the flag, the 7 was the first result, and it was the one that showed up repeatedly, which sort of ended up making the choice for me. So really from that point, I could go into the details whilst working, and I could focus on this as a piece of art from here, without really having to think about the challenges of using the flags palette. Which all of this means it is only fitting that I use the remaining time for this flag to discuss the details that I included, and just to sort of look at what I had been thinking for each section, the further that I worked at it. I know I have a few that will fill the time left nicely. The first of these are the plants that I put around. See, I originally held the idea of a coral reef and looked at those sorts of spaces. Yet I ended up changing that route since coral reefs are made up of bright and vibrant colours, most of which I just wouldn't have had in the flag after all of this. Especially since it's a lot of bright vibrant colours, not just blue. So it meant I sort of had to substitute the idea and look at another space in the ocean and just sort of change what was being seen in the piece. The impression of plants amongst the rocks is what I went with, and the things between it all is meant to be seaweed or seagrass, as I just kind of went with what felt right to include in the moment. But the detail I want to discuss here are the plants. I use the approach I take with bushes for this, the same base and brush at least, but practically nothing else, because I decided in the detailing and shading that it would be best to skip the leaf shapes I've come to commonly include with this. And well, this is mainly because it wouldn't have made too much sense to draw it how I usually would, and it wouldn't have looked right in any sense to me, so I wouldn't have liked it as much. I could instead use the dots and marks to imply it as a natural plant, without taking too far and drawing attention to it too much. Especially since the dots in this one combine in with the little white ones I add that are meant to be like bubbles or something in the water. They're subtle and they blend in, is what I'm trying to say. And after all, like in most of the pieces, the plants were meant to simply support everything else and to sell this impression of the scene without ever becoming the central focal point or taking too much away from everything else. And I sort of took the same approach to the seaweed as well, which leads into the second detail quite nicely. After all, I wanted it to be clear that this is underwater and avoid any confusion over this fact. It's why I approached it similar to how I would come to look at grass in any other context, but instead added the shape of seaweed to it and followed my usual process from there. Mainly varying the shading details and letting them sit with everything else around it, before pulling them forward too much or having them not follow the environment and everything else. Yes, it all was part of a struggle. I struggled quite a bit with it, just since I wasn't sure how it would look or turn out. But it is something that I just sort of went with and trusted the process for, which I probably need to do a bit more often. I mean, a lot of this set has been under that sort of category though, just sort of trusting the process and seeing how it ends up. And really I've had a bit more fun with it than I first expected I would. Yes, the outcomes have to be somewhat simple with the limited palettes that I am not used to. Perhaps time would mean I look at something more complicated, but they have been fun to work with regardless of challenges that they present, and the simplicity to it all. The main part I enjoyed was also making the distance details in the background, just using the darker shades towards the white light to imply further back plants and rocks, without having to think too much or to detail them too far either. It was something subtle and it added that little bit just to finish everything off. And speaking of finishing everything off, it is about time we lead into the next flag. Second up on today's list is the gender fluid flag. This one is an identity that typically falls under the trans or non-binary umbrella, just as it sits outside of traditional ideas about a gender binary. Yet it refers to someone whose gender isn't really a fixed thing. It itself is also quite a wide title. After all, someone who is gender fluid may fluctuate between different gender identities, or they may feel that some moments they may lack a gender, whereas others they don't. Some will vary between multiple identities, and some may only vary between a handful or less. Within this title, as well, some people's gender may shift by the day or week, and others will shift by months. So with all of this, it is quite a wide identity to cover and to explore. Now, as a flag itself, it was created in 2012 by J.J. Poole to represent this group. The pink in it is meant to represent femininity, or feeling female. The blue then represents masculinity and feeling male. The purple in this flag is then a mix of these two. Now, with the next bit, I do want to preface the claim with a sort of asterisk. I have looked online and found conflicting sources for this, so I'm not quite sure which one to go with. Some say that the white represents all genders and the black is a lack of gender. Others will then switch them around and say that the black is all genders and white is no gender. And they do sort of show up in equal amounts depending on where I'm looking. So they do represent these ideas, but I can't confidently say in which order. And I do just want to make it clear that it may be the wrong way round and I don't know which way they go. So instead, let's move on and look at why did I include this one. Well, in every other video I have included a gender flag, and I didn't want this one to be any different in this respect. I did consider some other flags though, maybe the demi flags or something else. Yet I saw this flag and realised that I have only heard this term around here or there. It isn't as common for me as others. And that's at least for me. It isn't as prominent where I am, and it was something that I wanted to look at and include for this reason. I didn't know too much about it going into it, and now I do. See, part of the process of these drawings is learning about the flag and the ideas behind it, and the identities behind it. Mainly looking at how they've existed in history and what it's come to mean today. For time, I can only give simple, surface-level explanations. Yet working on it all and forming the ideas for it lets me dive deeper into these identities and look at what the flag is and what it means. In other words, it lets me learn. And in this case, I haven't had much chance to look into this, as I haven't heard it as much. Ages ago, I was meant to. I had heard it on a list and put it on a list to look at, just since it was new and it was the first time I'd heard that label. Yet, with that search, I was never really able to go more than surface level with it, just as life got in the way and I had other projects at the time that I had to focus on, and by the time that life had eased up and I had the chance to, I'd kind of forgotten that it was something to research, as I hadn't heard about it in a while. Doing this series lets me remember it, and it lets me look at it and explore it. After all, part of art to me is learning and developing skills and ideas. Even without the art part of it, it's fun for me to keep learning and finding new stuff out. But anyway, let's look into it, and let me look at the sketches and ideas for this piece before I go too far into that tangent. And this one had actually been quite fun to generate ideas for. As I have said, I wanted each space to be somewhat unique and natural, and I still wanted it to tie into the rest of the set. Yet with this one, the name is what actually began to generate these sorts of ideas for me. The term fluid is what made me want to include a sense of water in this piece, as the blue also made this tie a bit more prominent. So I kept sort of thinking how I could do this, and allowing myself to continue down this avenue, as it did end up quite promising with everything else considered. I had waterfalls covered by the bi flag, and the underwater segment covered by the gay flag, so that sort of left things like lakes and rivers, which I went down and considered. In the end, I came up with what you see. The idea is meant to be a river passing through, as I thought of the ideas of rivers fit the identity that little bit better than a lake. See, lakes are things that tend to remain, and they are seen as quite pretty firm things. Yet, a river is known for gradual changes and how time flows over it. It changes over time, and the changes are slow, yes, but they change and shift regardless, which is why I thought to explore this and stick with it despite the challenges from the sketch. I mean, once I had the idea, that was one part. I had no clue how to take it from there. And to tell the truth, I didn't even know when I had finished the flats if it was an idea I'd stick with. You will probably notice that too though. The sketches changed a few times, and I did end up changing a portion of the flats to better fit the piece, and just to create something that I liked a little bit better. And yes, it was a challenge. Yet, I ended up with this image of a river sort of coming out of a forest and growing wider with the trees covering the start of it. In the end, I will sort of admit that I treated it like an environmental practice more than anything, and more than focusing on perfection. It was ultimately the only way that I would get it done and not restart the idea another time, just whilst also still having fun with it. The palette was a challenge, and I kept getting stuck on that. More on that in a moment. Yet the layout itself was something I had to work around. But the palette. I had no clue when I picked to work with this flag how it would work. I want to make it clear that I had no plan, and really knew it would give me a fair challenge with the colours and their vibrancy. Again, though, the vibrancy is a challenge I faced eternally in this set, and something I'm coming to expect at this point, and I'm working around early. And this one wasn't so much a vibrancy issue. In this one, it was the simplicity and using the pink as the trees to create these sorts of divides between the two uses of blue. But in saying that, let's focus on the remaining positives for this, and discuss the details that actually worked. This includes the front framing that I've just touched on. It really took a while for me to settle on it really, something I included once, and it's something that I saw from a photo in my phone gallery that looks similar to this. The picture itself was from a trip I took a while ago, where there was a river similar to this one between the bushes. The only main difference was that there had been more mountains in the background, or more hills is more like it, and there was a lot more in the foreground in detail. But I don't do photorealism at the best of times, so it was a reference more than anything. But either way, it gave me the framing idea, which I think worked out fairly well as an outcome, as it adds that little bit of interest to it overall. The final detail that I want to touch on, even though we might go into the next image here a little bit, is the river. It's sort of the main focal point though, and it changed a lot with the layouts and the details. But at the end of it all, I did enjoy working on it and coming to include it. I like the way it came to open wider in the foreground and little bits like that. And I will admit that I worked on this piece when I was sick, though it took a bit longer to work everything out for the shading for this reason. Yet the shading of the water is really what brought this piece together. It's why the approach I took with it came to fall under just try something and keep trying it until it works. Yet working it out did help the next image in the set. It just took me a bit longer for this one before I knew how to approach it. But in saying that, it is now about time that we move on. Now up next we have the Aero Ace flag. This is its own identity that sort of combines two I've looked at previously, due to the sort of overlap between the two that people identify with. Yet it combines aromanticism and asexuality, and typically means people would fall under both titles. This means that these people will experience little to no sexual or romantic attraction, in the same sort of spectrums as the other identities. So someone may lack them both entirely, and another would only have them under certain circumstances, much like the other two. The flag originates from December in 2018, and had been created to specifically represent the overlap between aromanticism and asexuality, and sort of give them something to identify with. It had been designed with the intent to give this community their own flag, and something that held its own meaning, rather than the earlier version that people had been using, which instead combined the aromantic and asexual flag into one. But with this version, the blue was chosen as a point between purple and green from the other flags to represent the spectrum that this identity is. The white is then to represent wholeness, with the yellow then representing love and relationships outside of traditional romantic or sexual ones. Finally, the orange is used for community. And excuse me for moving quickly here, but this is our shortest section. So with this said, this is another flag that I chose to include in this video to sort of complete the set, so to speak. I've done it with the other two, and had been looking at other ideas and flags in this region that I could include. I had looked at quite a few, yet the next broad identity that I could look at and work with had been this one. So again, it's another one that simply felt right to include. Besides, when looking at plausible options, I already had ideas forming with this one that I wanted to develop. What are these ideas? Well, that is what I'm going to discuss next. I mean, there were two routes available. The first had been looking at the oranges and blue to sort of compare it to an ocean and the sunset. I mean, the colours were all there, and it would have ended up being fairly similar to the flag itself in terms of order. At the end of the day though, it would have been one of the easiest layouts to work with this one too. Yet, all things considered, I have already done the ocean, in this video no less. I had looked at it, and doing the surface didn't really excite me to work on it either, and that is another part of this entire process too. So I let myself explore the other avenue that I'd come up with for this, which had been focused on the desert and the theme of an oasis within it. From there, I found some pictures as a reference for what I would be able to work with, and then combined it to look at my different sketching options. And I figured it may be straightforward for the most part. I mean, the colours would work well, and I had things I could use as the sky or as the water and sand. I even had a stronger yellow for things like plants if I really needed. Except, within all of this, I did forget things like tree trunks and other details in the piece, so it was a bit of a challenge to work out in that respect for that moment. It also took a few variations in the sketching phase to get the combination that I wanted to use as well, just one that made sense visually. But in honesty, it kind of worked itself out, so I would probably rank this palette as the second simplest that I worked with in this video. And that does, though, lead us into discussing the details of this piece, as this is the shortest section as I've mentioned, so there are still things that I want to mention here with the time left. It has been why I've been moving a bit quickly. The first of these is the water itself. I mean, this is the first detail of it all that I knew I wanted to include, and I had an idea for how it would work given the gender fluid image that I'd finished a few days before working on this one. I also knew this would be the area that I could add the most interest to, as I have a few methods to approach it at this point. I mean, I haven't really drawn most of this scene before, so it really had been an experiment that the water was a point that I could have fun with, and I did have fun with it. In a few of the sketches, I did try to look at how I could include it. There was one with a river, another with a town near to some water. Yet this form of oasis fit the image the best, and I could add all of the light to the water as I pleased. I mean, I actually enjoyed adding in reflections of yellow to it and white, just to add that shine to the centre. I mean, I could also combine the light blue as a variation from the flag, just until the darker tone that I used as the base ended up as a shadow almost, and gave the idea of depth to the piece. And it worked well with the sand. I mean, I don't draw sand often. I rarely have ideas set in the deserts or with the beach, so I never really have been working with it, and it's never been something that I have to draw before. I don't think I can actually point to a drawing where I have used it, or had an idea for it, but there have been many times that I considered it and changed it. But anyway, I kind of knew I wouldn't be detailing it much. I mean, grass and dirt has a bit more going on to it. There's blades of grass and flowers that could be added to it. Yet pictures of deserts don't usually have much going on. It's kind of their entire point. There's depth in the sand dunes, or texture of how the sand moved over time, yet there isn't much more beyond that, or much that would fit this piece at least. I mean, there are some plants in the desert, but none quite how I usually draw them, so it meant that I had to take a new approach with it, and sort of included these pointy plants that I saw in a few images. It made it look a bit more like a desert, is what I'm trying to say with this. Though, with the colours left, I again included them in white and shaded them with grey and other flag colours, just to try and keep them more present in the palette. It also shows up as the sun in the top centre, the white I mean, as it kind of came through as a sort of harsher light that implies a sun is there, and it's something stronger. And these were all fun. I may have dotted around a bit, but once I worked it all out, they were quite simple to include, and I did enjoy how they looked. However, I then used this to include the yellow leaves around the frame, that kind of came to be inspired by the trees, as the leaves included it there. And it all made a nice contrast around the details, and I had been able to do this. Then, as I went, I added in the rocks and such to sort of add a little bit more to the piece and complete it. And yes, these details were fun. Most of them were decided on as I went in the sketch. There were very few things that I sketched in before doing the colours, and there were very, very few things that I kind of thought of before this point, as most of them came to be through trialling and testing the colours. But it all very subtly came together to form this, even with a few variations during the flat stages. Yet that should actually wrap up this section. I kept with it all and I worked it out, so I can now finally say that I've drawn sand before. So let's just move into the final portion of this video here. So the last up here isn't really a single identity. Instead, I'm choosing to end this on the rainbow flag that has come to represent the community as a whole. and it is a flag with a rich history to it. So this flag is for the entire LGBTQ+ community, and it has come to represent all of the labels that fall under this. And as I've said, its history is quite rich, so I may have to summarise it in parts. Now, the first iteration had been made by Gilbert Baker in 1978. That flag had 8 stripes: pink, which represented sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for serenity and nature, turquoise had been included for art, indigo for harmony, and finally violet for spirit. However, due to colour shortages, the pink and turquoise stripe were later removed from the rainbow flag commonly recognised, and that shift was about 1979. So from there, the next main shift was around 2017, with what is known as the Philadelphia Pride flag. This version of the flag adds a black and brown stripe to the top of it, to sort of acknowledge the prejudice and struggles that people of colour commonly face, even within the community, and just to sort of challenge the lack of inclusion in that area. This then led to 2018, where Daniel Quasar introduced the Progress Pride flag, which has then become widely recognised. They added the colours of the Trans Pride flag alongside the black and brown stripe in a triangle form on the left of the flag. The placement of the arrow on the left is then to represent the progress that is left to be made towards equality. Yet the fact that it then points to the right is a sign of moving forward and making that progress as needed. Yet, these colours being featured are then meant to represent and signal the diversity within the community, and to further highlight the inclusion of them within this flag. Now, that then brings us to this flag. In 2021, Valentino Vecchetti introduced this version of the Pride flag, with the intersex flag included within the triangle. This one is known as the Intersex Inclusive Pride flag, for this reason, and it is considered the most currently used flag, as it is also then considered the most inclusive flag. Now, with that said, I chose to include this flag as it is a nice send-off to Pride, and it is also a nice way to sort of wrap up everything together, as this flag represents the community as a whole. I put it off to this last video for a handful of reasons that I will touch on shortly, but it did also feel right to finish off with it. So let's now look at it from an art point of view. And I will admit, this is probably the hardest palette that I had to work with in this entire set. Never mind what I've said about any other one. And I know that it doesn't seem like it at first. I mean, this flag basically gives me the entire rainbow at my disposal, alongside the other colours and variations of them that the other stripes include. So it doesn't look like a challenge, and most of the time it wouldn't be, except for a few areas and reasons. First up is the colours, as they're all very vibrant on their own. The colour wheel at the side would help sort of support this argument and show what I mean, as I had been using the flag to eyedropper the colours from, and each of them had been the most vibrant that they could be on the colour wheel. There were only a handful that weren't, so it meant that the vibrancy issue had returned, and that has been present in most of the other palettes. However, unlike those flags, I didn't really have anything to balance it with in an art sense, or something that could be used to lean into it really, other than a whole load of other vibrant colours. After all, there is a reason most people would somewhat limit the palette that they use. Which this then leads into challenge 2. How am I meant to include every colour of the rainbow in a coherent way without just drawing a rainbow? I mean, I want these to be drawings and not just a redoing of the flag. So what am I really meant to do with this? And how do I really do it in a way that includes every single colour that makes sense and handle the vibrancy issue as well? So all of this meant that I had no clue when sketching how I would go about it. I had one version where I mixed green and black together to form a sort of textured background thing, but I had no clue what to draw over it, or even what I had been going with it in the first place. So it got scrapped and changed. I mean, I was just staring at it one day, again, whilst not well, and decided to sketch in the loosest outline that I could possibly manage with my mouse, and call it a day. Well, to instead make it a problem for another day, I should really say. During that other day, I looked at it and decided to just add colour and see what happens. It's why the sketch is nothing impressive. There was no point planning it too much or trying to plan much more, and I sort of knew that it may be an outcome I didn't like too much, but I just needed to start and get on with it before getting fixated on details and everything else within this sense. So I took the outline of the hill and just went with it. I can't speak much on planning and intent, as I've kind of touched on, as I didn't do much more for this one, and any plan led into a dead end, or I got stuck on terms of colour and detail. I mean, I wouldn't need to add any colours at least. But I also knew that I couldn't darken any that were already present, and this is mainly where I hit the issues. The challenge is colours of the flag, so darkening them isn't really within the rules, and that is what I'll do. I just decided I wouldn't plan it anymore. So I did part of the flats, and I let it sit. I went back to it later to add a couple more details to it that may have worked out and may not have. And in the end, I came up with something that I felt that I could move on with. And that does take us into the details here. The first of these are the bushes. The orange was a risk, I can say that much, but I took it as I knew I had a single green that would be needed for the grass, and I could make the orange look like a bush more than I could make another colour that looked like grass. So I went with it, and actually loved how it went in terms of shading and how it looked in the end. See, orange as a colour is one that I rarely come to use. I never really have an idea for it or an idea for the palette to combine it with. For this one, I had no clue if it would work out, but the red and yellow usually pair well with it. So I took one for shading and one for lighting, and I figured I would just try it. Make it look like I usually would and add all the little details before settling on anything, and just go for it. In the end, this was probably one of my favourite results for the bushes so far. The colour was vibrant, okay, but the shading came together, and it is a colour combination I ended up enjoying. It actually gave me the confidence for the rest of the unusual colours I had placed at this point, and just to sort of trust myself that it would work out. Again, maybe not my favourite, but it would work out. The second detail here that I want to mention is actually the colours again. And I know I've gone on about it, but I have something different to say. I mean, they sort of came at this point to be a feature of the piece. I did consider adding more or making it busier, maybe look at a few more options for the horizon, ultimately, yet chose not to as it worked simpler, and especially since the colours were all vying for attention anyway, and they were all trying to be the focal point, so adding anything more wasn't the route to go. I was also satisfied that I included all the colours in a suitable manner via the flowers, which is how I kind of cheated and took off a lot of the colours from the combination and the list that I needed to include. But I just went with it, and I instead overlapped the colours where I could. It's why in the tree I added the shading with a purple on a low opacity multiply layer, and it's also why later I combined this all into the flowers at the base of the tree. And even in shading the grass, it's why I shaded with pure black in some places, rather than doing my normal approach and lowered its opacity where needed, or in others I just kept it to the black and layered things over it. I knew the only way I could form an outcome I liked would be to lean into it and to go with the flow, rather than planning and trying to keep everything a certain way. And the outcome. I do like it, surprisingly. Would I change it if I wasn't working off the flag? Almost certainly. Yet, for what it's based off and where the palette is from, I like what I could come to do with it and what I came up with, since it definitely gave me a headache or two when trying to plan it out or detail everything before ever starting it. It had been one way to wrap up, and one that I enjoyed. I had faced basically every challenge from the previous flags and their palette in this one, and I had the joy of trying to work them all out at once. And I do think that I still came up with a fairly decent outcome. And again, including this let me explore how far back this flag went, and what iterations it went through before ever coming to be the one we recognise today. And at the end of this set, that is part of what the joy is. Leaning into stuff and exploring stuff I otherwise wouldn't delve into. But that is all we have time for today. I do have a few updates though before I go. The first of these is that the prints are available over on my Etsy for the entire Pride series at this point, just if that is something that people are interested in. This goes for all of them that I've done in the entire series and every flag that I have covered. I will also be keeping them available for a few months after Pride. So if there are any that you like, they are available in A5 and A4 for the near future, even if you just like them as drawings. The link is always in the description for things like that, and even if the prints don't take your interest, I also offer a range of stickers and other artwork at the moment, with more stuff gradually coming. But I hope you have enjoyed this week's video either way, and I hope that Pride was enjoyable for everyone watching this, and I hope you have enjoyed the set in its entirety. Either way, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.